Hey everyone, welcome to another No Questions Left Behind. We're going to answer as many questions as we can that we didn't get to during the YouTube Live on two-step paint correction. I'm Sam.
I'm Stevie.
And we are without Nick today, but we're gonna buzz through all these questions. Keep in mind, we do have a free ceramic speed shine promotion going on for all orders over $25 or more. That is code SMLBV. Get a free 22-ounce ceramic speed shine for any order over $25. That offer ends April 25th. So get on the website and place your orders. If you need to stock up, now's a great time to do so. Get that free incentive with your order. Going to try and avoid talking too much to start out here because we have a ton of questions to answer in really small font. You guys were very active the other night during the during the YouTube Live, excuse me. So thank you as always for bringing the heat on all of the questions. You guys asked some great stuff. We got a wide range from beginner questions to heavily advanced questions. So we're gonna cover as much as we can here. To start off, we had a ton of questions about all of our pad types and then the Boss creams and how those pads correspond to those creams. So before we get into the nitty-gritty of the actual questions, we're going to kind of cover that broadly to answer all of the questions that were about that topic. So really quick, I'm going to go through this fast. Our pad types from least aggressive on my left to most aggressive on my right here. We have the black foam finishing pad, the yellow foam perfecting pad, the orange foam correcting, the white foam fast correcting. So those are our 4 foam options. And then in fiber options, we have the knitted wool, which is slightly less aggressive, produces less heat than the microfiber. Now we do have a 6th pad that does not have a foam interface, which is the microfiber fast cutting pad. That is going to be our most aggressive pad offering. All of these Boss pads are available in our full size range from 1 inch all the way up to the 6-inch pads or 6.5-inch pads. That's the pad face dimension. So you have a wide range of size availability. That being said, there is color coding to these pads, obviously, and that color coding matches to your corresponding Boss cream. So for example, the black foam finishing pad goes with finishing sealant. The black banner at the bottom of that bottle denotes the pad type to start with on that product. That goes up, perfecting cream, yellow band, yellow pad, correcting cream, orange band, orange pad, and so on. However, those are guidelines for starting out. Those are not hardline rules that you absolutely have to follow every time. In the live, we talked a little bit about pad flexing, where you can utilize a different pad with a different cream or compound to achieve a customized result to that specific scenario or vehicle finish. So, for example, I stated one of my favorite combos is tuning up the finishing sealant or another all-in-one type product with a microfiber pad. When you're working in a situation where you don't have a ton of time, you want to get it done in a single step, but you need a little more cutting ability than what the finishing sealant would provide on the black foam as a finishing product. You can add a little more cut to this with microfiber. As long as you're not using it on like a really soft plain black finish or plain dark color, you're not going to see any haze or marring caused by the microfiber. Great one-step solution. Get a little more cutting value out of your finishing sealant, pairing it with the microfiber pad. That's just one small example of how you can pad flex. Of course, you can detune a more aggressive product with a lighter foam as well if you're working on a really soft finish. So there's all kinds of variables and combinations that you can experiment with and tinker with when you're working on paint. Yeah. Just like you wouldn't rebuild a motor with a single hand tool or a single tool of any kind, you wouldn't polish every paint system with a single product combination.
Yeah, and we did have a live where we talked, I believe, the entire time about pad flexing and polish flexing.
Yeah.
So definitely check that out if you want more information on that. But perfect example is, I'm pretty sure when I was still in the store, there was a Porsche that came in that we did a demo on, and the paint was so soft that we had to use a more aggressive compound with a softer pad in order to get the bite that we needed.
Yeah, so
without losing haze.
Sometimes you got to kind of experiment a little bit depending on how your test section goes and find a combination that's going to get you to the results you want in the least amount of time with the least amount of headache. So we give you a lot of options to do so. No paint system is alike. You can even sometimes have vehicles that are the same, year, make, model, same color, but they were painted at different times throughout that year of production, or they were painted in different production facilities, and the paint may respond slightly differently. Most manufacturers these days is pretty consistent, unless you're talking aftermarket versus OEM, but there are some variances there. So important to remember what worked on one paint may not work on the next paint that you're working on. So good to have a system that allows you to really dial in that setup.
And then always do a
specific situation.
And then always do a test section like you did in the live.
Yeah, always do a test section. I have a horror story from when I very first started detailing. I was working on a black Dodge Viper, plain black, non-metallic. I had a combination that I'd been using that was really effective for me. I did that combo on the car. I was checking it with a light, but I wasn't using really good lights, wasn't using the sun. Pulled it out at the end of the job for a sun check and realized, there was probably 3/4 of that car that I had to go back over because that combination was not as effective as the previous time I used it. So keep that in mind. Without further ado, though, we're going to start tearing through these questions. So first question I have to answer is from Puerto Rico. Some of these we're going to not include the names just to try and speed things up. So if we miss your name, please forgive us. But we had this one a few times, so I want to start off with it. Please cover the real difference between complete compound and fast correcting cream. I'm finding that compound sometimes seems to do a better job with serious defects. So that's a pretty straightforward question. Differences between fast correcting cream and our complete compound. The primary difference is the abrasive particle size. Fast correcting cream has a slightly smaller abrasive particle with a higher load of it, so that you still maintain extremely effective defect removal while having a better finishing quality than a lot of comparable products out there on the market. So biggest, or probably the number one difference is that your fast correcting cream is going to finish down better in most paint systems than complete compound will. Second difference would be lubricity and buffing cycle. Fast correcting cream is developed to be compatible with long throw platforms, or to be more user-friendly with long throw platforms. That's not to say that complete compound can't be used on a long throw. However, fast correcting cream is going to give you a longer working time, longer buffing cycle, better lubricity, slightly easier wipe off, and so on. So in a higher performance scenario where you're really looking for the absolute best finish quality, no dusting, all of the above, good lubricity, good working time, fast correcting cream is going to be the product for you. If you're more into an entry-level setup, or you're working with a standard throw orbital, complete compound is still a very high-performing product compared to what else is out there. So that was somewhat long-winded, but we got that question probably at least 10 times, so wanted to make sure we went over it.
I don't remember if you touched on it, but complete compound also works really well by hand.
Yes.
It gives you that extra bite. So if you are set on hand polishing, or there's some reason that you need to hand polish, that's going to be maybe a better solution for you than one of the Boss.
Definitely, yeah. Thank you for mentioning that. I completely forgot that part. The Boss creams are all intended for machine use. They can be used by hand, but the results are going to be a little more limited. Complete polish and complete compound were developed with both hand and orbital use in mind. So they're going to be a little more effective for you by hand in most situations.
Now, mind you, whenever you're polishing by hand, your results are limited no matter what compound or polish you're using.
Very much
There's that
so.
too.
It's a good thing to remember.
All right, so we had a question. Guys, can you please explain or show what happens when you don't properly decon before polishing? So essentially, there are contaminants that can embed into the little crevices in the paint. There's microscopic crevices in your paint. I like to kind of compare them to pores on your face. So sometimes there are things that can kind of get down deep in there and embedded. And so when you're polishing, you're then pulling those contaminants out with the pad instead of having removed those ahead of time. So that pad can then take those micro contaminants and swirl them around the paint. So you're potentially adding more defects while you're trying to remove defects. Long story short.
Good answer. Adventures of Topher asks, I would like to know when to use microfiber versus foam. So really common question, one we got a few times. And a good rule of thumb that I like to employ is severity of defects. Of course, this takes a little bit of practice and experience to kind of know what you're looking at. But if you're looking at heavy swirl marks, light to moderate to severe scratches, when I say scratches, I'm meaning something that's deeper than a swirl mark. So those are normally going to be in the moderate to severe range. Heavy water spots, things that are very visible to the naked eye. If the paint's really oxidized, or you can visibly see those swirl marks without a focused light, things like that, that's where starting with microfiber can be pretty advantageous. So these are going to cut harder, get you to results faster in terms of removing those moderate to heavy defects. So the fiber pads, microfiber, or the wool, good starting point when you know, okay, that looks pretty severe. And especially if you know you've got good paint system intact, some good thickness there to work with. Foam, anytime, say I'm working on a really soft finish and I know I'm gonna have a hard time with marring from microfiber and I may not need the cut, or I'm just approaching something that isn't quite as severely defected. The fast correcting pad, the white foam pad, this is a very aggressive foam pad. So, this will cut on the heels of the wool, not quite as aggressive, but still pretty aggressive. And in soft finishes, this one can actually leave some, some light marring as well. But when you're talking orange, yellow, black, pretty much any finish, even some of the softest finishes I've worked on, typically aren't gonna haze or mar with the orange, yellow, or black foam. So softer paint finishes, second steps, situations where you're working on a plain color and you don't want to have to come back with a second step. You want to do it in a single step and you don't want to have any risk of haze. That's again going to be a good time for the foam options. And really it's definitely an experience thing. Do some testing, do some test sections with both and see which one's going to be the best approach. That test section is really your best friend when it comes to figuring out a combination and not just assuming that something's going to work well for you.
Yeah, and right on the heels of that, the next question is for a two-step process, when should I use correcting cream versus fast correcting cream for the first step? Again, there's no right answer there. You really want to do that test section, see how correcting cream gets the defects out. If there's still some heavier defects that you want to get out, then do a test section with fast correcting cream and maybe a more aggressive pad.
Yeah, you'll get to a point where you've done enough, paint systems where you can look at a paint and say, okay, that's pretty bad. I know that's probably going to need microfiber and FCC to start. Or, that's moderate. I know these vehicles, say it's a GM vehicle, it's good kind of middle of the road paint system, not too hard, not too soft. You may be able to approach it with, with a foam. Or if you have metallic and you're not worried about haze or a lighter color, a lot of those things can inform that decision. Let's see. This is a good one. When I two-step, is clay barring first a waste? So we had a lot of this question of, does a two-step polish negate the need to clay bar? No, it does not. Clay barring or decontaminating the paint is really strongly advised as a best case practice no matter how many steps of polishing you're doing afterwards. The only time you don't need to clay bar or decontaminate a paint system is if it's already smooth and you don't have any contaminants present there. I would say any other time you're taking a pad and compound or polish to a paint, you want it to be fully decontaminated so that you're not running the risks of picking that contaminant up and causing further defects in the paint, or dirtying up your pads faster, having to run through more pads, just generally giving you more headaches. So we always recommend paint decontaminating unless the paint system's already smooth.
Yeah. Boricua 30 asked, how long should I wait to wax newly painted panels? I recently had my hood and bumper painted. I think I would definitely go by the recommendation of the painter, but typically it's 90 days before you want to apply any protection. And that's just to let all of the gases that are evaporating to allow that paint to harden and fully cure.
Yep.
It's not hindering those gases from escaping.
Yeah.
And same thing with a wax. That's why we recommend waiting 12 to 24 hours if you're applying a second coat of a wax. You always want to give it that full time so that the first coat can let those gases escape and fully cure before you apply the second coat.
Yeah. Anything that's really durable, ideally you want to avoid it. You can always ask your painter. That's a good way to go too, because they're going to know best based on the processes and the type of paint that they used, how long you need to wait to go ahead and hit it with a durable protection.
Bob asked, should you wipe off the polish residue first before going to the paint prep, or wipe off the residue with the paint prep? I would recommend wiping the residue off first, because the intention with the paint prep is to ensure that you're removing all of the oils from the surface. And if you have oils on the surface while you're applying that, you may not be removing all of them.
Yeah, there's situations, you know, if the residue is becoming sticky or hard to remove, you can spray surface prep cleanser on there and that'll free it up, make it much easier to wipe off. But like Stevie said, I prefer to do it that way because it also prevents your towels from getting caked with residue. If you're spraying surface prep cleanser on and wiping the residue off with the towel like that, you're gonna have to use a few more towels versus if you're using one towel, a dry towel for wipe off, and then a separate, you know, clean towel to do the surface prep cleanser. Usually that'll allow you to use a few less towels. Another good one that we got a lot is, this is from the same user. I haven't purchased any grios, compounds, or polishes because you don't list the grit cutting capabilities of any of them. What is the grit cutting capability? So I think I may have misunderstood this question during the live. We briefly touched on it, but sometimes customers will ask us like, what grit sandpaper are your compounds comparable to? And I mentioned during the live that I don't feel like that's a very accurate representation because sandpaper is almost always gonna, you know, cut harder than a compound up, you know, until maybe you get into the really high, like 5,000 and 8,000 grits. But what grits of sand scratches will they remove is a good question and something that we can give you. So fast correcting cream will remove 2,000 grit sand scratches in most paint finishes when paired with a microfiber or wool pad. Your correcting cream is going to remove, you know, 3,000 in most finishes, even when it's paired with, you know, a foam pad. You know, there are some exceptions to that. If the paint is very hard, you may need to step up to a microfiber. And then perfecting cream, you know, this one is really meant for finishing and not necessarily cutting out defects as deep as sand scratches. But this will work in a lot of cases for, you know, 5,000 or above, depending on the pad you're using it with and how hard the paint is. So those are some kind of basic, you know, guidelines or rules of thumb. Of course, different paint hardnesses and variables like that will impact those results as well. And keep in mind, you know, those references we're giving are all used with a long throw orbital, so a G15 or G21.
Brian Doherty asked, I have the correcting cream and finishing sealant. Any issue using Best of Show wax when done with the finishing sealant? Do I even need to use the Best of Show wax? There's no issue with using it. Of course, you want to give the finishing sealant that 12 to 24 hour period to fully cure before you apply Best of Show wax. But is it necessary? No. Could you definitely do it and get a little more gloss and depth to the color? Absolutely. And of course, that added protection on top.
I like this one because it's a good question and it highlights how durable some of our stuff is. Brian Covington asked, said, a little off topic, today I wanted to strip a 5-month-old ceramic all-in-one from my SL. He did 2 times foaming surface prep, clay, surface prep cleanser, and it's still showing good hydrophobicity. What's wrong? He said, looks good, but what am I doing wrong to get it off? So this stuff's just very durable. I would say, you know, if you do a second decontamination, that's likely going to make a big dent in it. Or, you know, if you're doing a thorough paint correction, you probably weakened it enough to the point where you can jump into paint correction and you're not going to really run into any issues. That first step of paint correction, your first, you know, 2, 3, 4 passes are going to cut off any remainder of that protection and get you to a clean slate. If you're not doing you know, any sort of paint correction, you just want to reapply protection, you may have to do, you know, another surface prep or another decontamination step to fully strip that off. The ceramic products are pretty durable, so you do have to work at them a little more to get them completely off the paint.
Chris Allen asked, can I use speed shine for bird poop removal, or can it be done with ceramic speed shine too? You can use either. Of course, keep in mind ceramic speed shine does impart protection, so depending on if you've already done a protection step or you're planning on doing that shortly after, you might weigh that when you're making the decision, but both can be used. I'm going to kind of get off in the weeds real quick. You definitely want to remove that bird poop as soon as possible. I've had a vehicle come in for a demonstration where it was a brand new vehicle off the lot and it had sat under a telephone wire for I think 6 months, and unbeknownst to the owner, birds had pooped all over it. Yeah. So he comes in with this moderately new vehicle with bird poop spots all over the hood, and the paint was checked. There was no getting it back. It was failed. So make sure that you get that off as soon as possible.
Yeah, that's a good tip for when you're buying a brand new car too. if you see funky stuff on the paint and it's a brand new vehicle, ask the dealer if that vehicle's been stored outside for very long, because some of what you're seeing may be permanent, like those bird dropping etchings that Stevie experienced in that demo. They were so severe that they weren't coming out really.
Yeah, and for a novice, if you see a spot that kind of looks like when you first crack an egg in a pan and it's kind of got a like oblong outline,
Yeah.
you see a spot like that, it's got kind of like little like ripply lines around the edge, or like Mercedes symbol type, like three-pronged, you know, like scratch looking marks. I don't know how best to describe them, but that's a good indicator that the paint's failing.
Yeah, checking kind of where it looks like, you know, like a crack in the paint, so to speak. Chris B asked, this one we got a ton as well, so it's about single stage. Are your products good for non-clear coat vehicles, and are the procedures the same? The short answers to that are yes and yes. Our products are all great on single stage paint, and for the most part, the procedures are going to be the exact same. The only exception is that single stage paint is almost always going to be softer, and you're also going to see the color of the paint pigment in your pad. So clear coat, you don't pick up the color of the paint. If you're working on clear coat and you see the color of the paint on your pad, it means you've probably burnt through the clear and should, you know, stop and check out what you're doing. But on single stage, it's normal to see the color of paint on your pad. So if you're polishing a red single stage paint, you're going to get red paint transfer onto your pad. Normally you'll get results faster in single stage because it's softer, but it can be more sensitive to marring and tracking or buffer trails and things like that. So you'll typically, you know, you may still need to cut with an aggressive pad, but in my experience on most single stage paints, you're definitely going to want to finish with a foam pad.
Yeah. In my experience, single stage paint is also notorious for, not all single stage paint, but for being like sticky. And
yes,
so definitely this is going to be a situation where you absolutely want to do your test section, test your method, take a bright light to it, and inspect before you do the entire vehicle.
Yeah, and if, like Stevie said, that sticky paint is common when it's really oxidized single stage that hasn't been treated for a long time. So if you're agreeing to doing a detail for money and it's a car that you know is really oxidized, ask if you can do a test section on it before you tell that person how much you're going to charge for that detail. I think we've both gotten ourselves in trouble and being like, oh yeah, it's single stage, that'll be easy, no problem, you know, $400 or $500, and then, you know, 12 hours later you're banging your head against the wall because you can't get, you know, the sticky residue off or whatever.
Yeah. Chris Grosso asked, how good is your all-in-one? It's not good, it's great. No, it is great. The abrasive is really capable, and speaking to our pad flexing earlier, you can definitely get a good cut with it with a more aggressive pad. If you want to keep it very mild, of course, you can use a softer pad, and then the protection is phenomenal, so it's great. Duh.
It is awesome stuff. I mean, yeah, finishes down really well, very capable. Nothing bad to say about that one. Let's see, Chris Grosso also asked, do you prefer to polish at a slower buffer speed or faster buffer speed? So since you mentioned polishing, I'm assuming you're speaking to the second step, you know, or the lighter step when you're working with a product like perfecting cream or finishing sealant and a lighter foam pad. Yes, typically that step can be done at a slower speed. I almost never do my polishing or finishing steps at a speed above 4. Usually I'll try to run it, you know, at 3. Sometimes I'll speed up to 4 if needed. But you should never need to go into 5 or 6 for that polishing step.
Christopher Barbour asked, I've always felt to chemical decon before claying. You're absolutely correct. The reason that you want to do a chemical before the mechanical is that iron and fallout is going to remove those ferrous particles so that then you're not potentially scrubbing those across the surface with your clay tool. And so we always recommend the chemical first. That'll dissolve those ferrous particles and help get those out of the paint. Then you can remove more of the organic contamination with your clay or synthetic clay.
I was kind of hesitant to answer this one, but I am going to answer it because it's a good question that I don't think we've gotten before, and it's a practice that we've actually done here a couple times. Christopher Barbour also asked, can you use synthetic clay with foaming surface prep to help strip previous sealants or protection, especially when they're ceramic? That's not something that we recommend on a regular basis because foaming surface prep can actually soften the synthetic clay or make it sticky. However, we have had success doing that on a couple occasions. although that foaming surface prep, that surface prep mitt was designated for that use and not used for standard decon after. So if you are going to do that, we recommend that you separate your mitt, label it as your foaming surface prep decon surface prep mitt, because it may become slightly soft and sticky. Normally when you have that foaming surface prep applied to the vehicle and it's very slippery because of the soap in that, the slight stickiness of the surface prep mitt isn't a problem. But you can do it. It is effective at stripping things down. Just keep in mind that it may soften your surface prep mitt.
Dave Nyack asked, I guess the paint gauge does not work on Corvettes with fiberglass. That would be correct. Since the surface is not metal, the paint gauge will not read the thickness.
Yep. Yeah, and there's a lot of cheap paint gauges out there that also won't read aluminum, things like that. So you may want to make sure you check before you go spend your money. How do you determine if it's soft, medium, or hard clear coat? So we briefly touched on that during the live, but it's a really tough thing to determine without any experience in polishing paint. But doing that test section is going to give you a good indicator, especially if you have worked on a few different paint systems and you have some understanding of what's been soft and really responsive and what's been hard and really resistant to polishing. So there's different ends of the spectrum. Kind of some general rules of thumb. German vehicles, especially modern German vehicles, tend to be on the harder side. Mercedes, BMW, I believe Porsche is using it now in some of their new vehicles. They use a high solids clear coat, which actually has ceramics or high solid particles that rise to the top of that paint coat as it cures and create more of a hard shell on the top surface of that, which can be more resistant to aggressive processes like products like fast correcting cream and microfiber. That's not saying they can't be corrected. It's just going to take a little more work. And then there's vehicles like Toyotas, Japanese vehicles in general, that tend to be on the softer end of the spectrum. So my process would be entirely different, or at least pretty different if I were working on like a solid black brand new BMW versus a solid black mid 2000s Toyota like my Tundra is. So a little different approaches there.
Yeah. Dave Ritchie asked, how do you determine whether the paint needs a 2-step or a 1-step? I think that there are 2 different paths to go here. One being doing your test section and seeing how the defects come out. Another being, before you start your process in general, you should assess how much time you're willing to dedicate to the process, whether it's a daily driver or a show car, and therefore that'll determine whether you really want to perfect it, or if it's a daily driver that's being driven on the freeway, maybe even 100 miles a day or whatever it is, you probably don't want to perfect that because you are removing paint when you're polishing, and it's probably going to pick up scratches and swirls and whatever else while you're commuting and driving it daily. So that might be something where you want to generally shine it and remove a lot of the defects, but don't really want to perfect it. And so that could determine whether it's a 2-step or a 1-step. And there's plenty of other factors, but I don't think there's one set way to be like, okay, that's how you know it needs a 1-step or a 2-step. You just kind of got to gauge it based on the condition of the vehicle and then what it's being used for.
Yeah, we also got the question a lot of like, hey guys, I have XYZ vehicle, what do you recommend? That's a really hard question to answer, you guys. Like there's a plethora of options that you can throw at a vehicle, but it really is based on the condition. Brand new vehicles, I would say like ceramic AllinOne is probably going to be one of our most recommended products for a brand new vehicle. Odds are, even if it's brand new, it has some swirl marks. We get people all the time, they're like, it's brand new, it doesn't have scratches. You pull it in the car care school and put a light on it and you're like, what are those? It's like almost all brand new vehicles are going to have some defects. So don't assume that you don't need to polish it a little bit. If you don't care, you can throw a straight protectant on it, call it a day. I definitely recommend at least decontaminating and protecting it. If it's a brand new vehicle, brand new vehicles are already one of the worst investments you can make, right? Unless it's a collector vehicle or something like that. It's probably not brand new if it is. So you really want to preserve that vehicle as best you can and getting some protection laid down right off the bat, especially to some of the more sensitive surfaces, the plastics, rubber trim, things like that. It's going to be really advantageous in making your life easier down the road.
Yeah, and make sure the lot boys don't wash your car. So if you
Yeah,
are
that's
getting a
another
brand new vehicle, maybe it's not a collector, but it's like a 2024 or whatever that you're ordering, make sure that you ask them not to wash the vehicle. I know that seems silly because you'd want to get a brand new vehicle clean, but no, you really don't trust
You want to be the one to wash it.
Yeah.
Odds are if the dealer is washing it, they're taking it through a tunnel. Most dealers don't hand wash their cars. If they do, good on them, but I'd also check the condition of their wash pads, wash mitts, wash water, all of that stuff. Because I know I've peeked back into a few detail bays at dealerships before. It's like you see the guy picking the mitt up off the ground and taking it back to the brand new black 7 Series BMW or whatever, and it's just like, oh man,
Yeah.
feel bad for the guy who's buying that. So, yeah. Take a flashlight with you when you go to buy a new car. That'll always freak out the sales guy. He'll be like, what are you doing, man? And you're like, now you see all these swirl marks? That's $1,000 off MSRP right there. I'm gonna have to pay to have those taken out right away.
Yeah, they'll be in there like, you go help that guy. No, you.
Yeah, exactly. That's a good way to not get harassed when you're on a car lot.
Dennis Barrios said, it's hard to keep the pad flat. I think a good way to kind of monitor yourself as you're getting comfortable with being able to keep the pad flat, because it is kind of a skill. It's like riding a bike. Once you get comfortable with it, you're pretty good at it. But our backing plates have, I don't have one to show you, but our backing plates have little flags on the side that are red. So it's a mainly black backing plate with the little red spots. I think one has the size and one says Griot's Garage, if I'm not mistaken. But as those are spinning, you can see those. And so being able to watch that and check for it slowing down. Typically when I do demonstrations for new customers, I'll have the pad running flat on the panel, and then I'll kind of tilt it a little so that they can see how it stops and slows down. And so as long as you're keeping an eye on that backing plate's really going to do a great job at telling you whether the pad is flat, whether it's wedged up against the contour that you're up against, or whatever the case be. And just keep an eye on that as you get comfortable. And then a good thing too is if you have someone available to stand with you, it's really easy to see if you're standing a few feet back that, oh, you need to lift the rear end of the tool up a little because the top of the pad isn't contacting. If you're solo, you can watch the buffer trail. Oftentimes, like new polishers, referring to the person polishing, new polishers will be running a 6-inch pad, for example, across the panel, and really they're only contacting with 2 inches of it, and that's because it's tilted up. And so watching that path after you pass the orbital over the surface, if it's not the full size of the pad or close to it, there's a very good chance that your pad's tilted in one direction or the other.
Yeah, that's a really good thing to practice if you're new to polishing or new to using orbitals, because if you don't master that and you're spending hours on a vehicle, you're not going to get the results that you want. It's probably the biggest mistake we see new users make. And I always tell folks, grab a tool from under here, Stevie. When I'm doing demos and stuff like that, or showing somebody how to use a tool at first, lay it flat on the paint like that. Just no pressure, no nothing. Do not put pressure with this hand, because every time you do that, the pad's going to go like that, no matter what. Always apply your pressure with your front hand straight down. If you're over here, don't do too much of that either, because you'll wedge it. So pressure straight down. Do not apply pressure with your backhand that's on the pistol grip, because that is almost always going to wedge the pad unless you have perfectly even pressure with both hands. If you're applying pressure with that backhand, it's going to be really tough to keep that pad flat. So I'll almost sometimes lift up with my backhand, all the pressure with that front hand. Or if you have your hand down here, same thing. You can grip that shroud and apply your pressure straight downward over the center of the counterbalance shaft, so that you're getting that pressure straight centered over the tool, not wedging that pad. When you're on a vertical surface, it can be even harder, because here you're going to really want to just inherently apply pressure with your pistol grip hand. Same thing. Don't let that hand apply pressure. Just use your top hand to push straight into the paint. And then watching that pad rotation, like Stevie said, you can see on the back of the plate here. Whoops. Right there. You got that red flag. So that allows you to see the rotation like so with the logo and that red flag. You can watch the backing plate rotate. For the boss plates and stuff, you can always draw a black Sharpie on the white urethane, and accomplishes the same thing.
Sorry, these are very hard to read.
That's okay. Our font is tiny, you guys. We need these sheets of questions. You guys asked so many questions. We had to shrink them way down and fit them on a page. So Stevie doesn't even wear glasses like I do, and she still can't read it.
I probably need glasses.
Another good one, so we responded to, what speed do you polish at? This is what speed do you compound. So I almost always compound at 5 or 6. I rarely need to use 6. Our tools have a lot of power. 6 is a nice speed to have if you need that extra oomph, but typically I find my happy medium at 5. If it's soft paint or I'm working on really light defects, bump down to 4. You don't always need the speed if it's really light stuff. So, but play around with it, figure out what you're comfortable with and what works best for you.
James Giannakis asked, before using a new clay pad, do you have to prime it on the windshield? We absolutely recommend breaking it in on glass before using it on paint, just because there is a non-stick coating. Just because of the way the packaging is, it has a little hole so you can feel the texture. And so we always recommend breaking it in on glass to remove that coating prior to using it on your paint.
Another question, do you think wet sanding would get rid of all the defects on that hood? We had lots of questions about wet sanding. Wet sanding isn't always a perfect solution. It's definitely, a lot of people are interested in it because the professional detailing industry is using it a lot more for isolated defect correction or even whole vehicle paint correction, especially when you're working on show vehicles or really high-end stuff where you want that paint to be nice and flat and crisp. But there's a common saying that I really like when it comes to wet sanding and removing scratches with wet sandpaper. Oftentimes you want to sand to improve and not always remove. We talked briefly about preserving your clear coat for the purpose of the vehicle. If it's a daily driver and you thin that clear out so much because you want to wet sand every last defect out of the paint, odds are that clear is going to fail at some point down the road. If it's a daily, you probably don't want clear coat failure. Really any car you don't want clear coat failure, but something that's going out in the elements a lot and that you may need to polish again later on, you want to maintain some healthy clear coat on there. Otherwise, you're going to run into problems. When I got my Land Cruiser, that's a single stage paint, but it was already very thin, and we were developing our boss system at the time, and I was really trying to get certain panels as perfect as I possibly could. And that ended up being a fool's errand. I thinned out the paint on one side of that truck. That's why I ended up having it repainted. So really ask yourself, if you're going for perfection, really ask yourself, what am I using this vehicle for? What is the rest of its life going to see? And if it's a vehicle that you need to see some more use or get some more use out of, I wouldn't go too far on it. So
Yeah.
Lots of trade-offs there, but something you have to ask yourself.
Mm-hmm. Jeff Hoffman said, I got a gift certificate for Christmas. What do you recommend to start out with? I have a 2011 RAV4 and a new 2022 Camry with very thin paint. We've kind of touched on this a few times, but there's no one shoe or one size fits all process. What I would recommend for all of you that are asking specifically on your vehicle what the best process is you reach out to our customer service department. You can either call them 800-345-5789 or send them an email, customerservice@griotesgarage.com. You can provide photos, you can explain the condition of the vehicle, what it's used for, so on and so forth, and they can help you determine your best personalized approach for your vehicle.
We had a lot of questions on what lights we were using. We were mainly using our cordless LED shop lights. So we have these in 2 different sizes now. We have this smaller, it's a 1800 lumen unit. It has 3 different brightness settings, so low, medium, and high. It's a really nice light. They're concave shrouds so that if you drop the light on the lens, it's not going to break the lens because the lens doesn't contact the surface that it's hitting. Very heavy duty. They all have the rubber shroud around them, so even if you accidentally bump that into a paint finish, you're not going to dent it or severely scratch it. They have this nice stand on the back that you can tripod mount. I like using it too as kind of a strap when I'm holding it over paint to prevent me from dropping it. So they're really versatile lights. I usually use anywhere from 3 to 5 of them during a detail. I'll normally have a few propped on the floor looking up at the paint, and then I'll have a tripod or 2 set up with some aiming down on the surfaces that I'm working on up higher. Like I said during the live, having some focused lights set up around the vehicle as you're working so you don't have to constantly check with a handheld light really speeds things up and makes for more consistent, better results in the long run. So never hurts to invest in some good lights. And you can use them for all kinds of other stuff too. I use these for all my mechanical work. I've used them for outdoor projects when I'm working at night. I was doing some batting practice with my son in the yard the other night, and we set a few of these up so we could keep going after it got dark. They're great lights and pretty affordable too, so good option.
Paul Rivard asked, do you use Airbrush or wash system to clean the pad after each panel? Both the air and the brush are great options. I personally prefer air. Do you have a preference?
I like air, yeah. It's faster, I think, less time, less headache. So if you have access to it, that's normally what I use. Or what we use, excuse me.
All right.
See, how do you decide to change out pads as you work around the car? Is it just after a set amount of panels or based on how loaded up the pad is or how it's performing? It's a great question. Really, I normally do it based on kind of time or panels. And as you get experience, you'll be able to do it based on the condition of the pad too. But sometimes, it can be easy to, like, okay, I don't want to go back and swap a pad right now. I'm just going to keep buzzing. Normally, you'll save yourself time by swapping pads because a fresh, firm, cool pad that isn't all soft and squishy is going to cut much better than a pad that's warmed up and loaded with compound has become soft and isn't quite as resistant. Microfiber, when the fibers get matted, or wool, when the fibers get matted and they're not standing up and fluffy, you're going to have much less cut there too. That's where your compressed air, your brush comes in. And using compressed air or a brush, I always use it. So every set of passes I do a section with 5 passes. I pull that pad off, I brush it or blow it out. I go to my next section. So I'm brushing or blowing the pads every time my orbital is slowing down to apply more compound or polish to go to a next section, and that allows me to run pads a little further. However, I still like swapping them almost every panel depending on the vehicle and the job. But finding something that works well for you.
All right, we're getting the symbol. It means time's up.
All right, yeah, I think we got through a lot. You guys, we had a lot more to get through, but unfortunately wasn't possible to hit them all in the 45 minutes that we had. But you guys are, you continue to surprise us with how good of questions and how many questions you guys can ask in those hour-and-a-half YouTube lives. So I think the next 2-step correction, we might have to do like a marathon live or do a 2-part live on that 2-step process because there's so much to cover. But thank you all for joining, and as always, have fun in your garage.